Hello everyone, my name is Alok Mishra and I welcome you once again on my channel on YouTube, English Literature Education. Today, we are going to discuss how to make your arguments while you're writing a literary essay, a research article, or even your thesis. How to make your arguments persuasive, impactful, and decisive. Literature is all about making arguments, and while you make your arguments, you have to be careful that your arguments should be backed up by evidence that is credible and also backed up by supportive arguments that support your major argument that in turn supports your central proposition. So this video is in the continuation of the series that we started a few days ago on how to write quality research papers, how to choose a perfect title for your research paper, and then we come to making your arguments decisive, persuasive, and impactful. So in today's video we are going to discuss the same thing. So now I'll jump into the step-by-step guide to making your arguments impactful, decisive, persuasive, and qualitative. So let's get it started. The very first step of making your arguments impactful is thinking about the counter-arguments that are strong, that are influential. Because if there is no enemy, then you will never know about your strength. So you have to think about the possible and logical and valid counter-arguments before you start making your arguments. When someone reads a paper, all that you have is your lines, your arguments, your words. So you have to make sure that you make them count. Now, thinking about possible counter-arguments makes it so that whatever you create within your mind to write on the paper is going to be strong, is going to be logical, and is also going to be forceful because you have to contradict something that is coming to you with the same force. For example, suppose someone has to write about Matthew Arnold's writing skills as a prose writer. Now, the person who is writing about Matthew Arnold's prose skills will have to compare Arnold's skills to someone else. For example, the Victorian figures who were active in prose writing. Now, you'll have to find those Victorian authors, those Victorian literary figures who were writing prose equal to or just somehow at the same level of Matthew Arnold, so that you can think about his skills and then you can think about the skills of Matthew Arnold, and then ultimately you can make your arguments in defense of Arnold's skills and show that, see, these are the ways that prove Arnold's prose skills are better than A, B, or C. So this is what I mean by thinking about counter-arguments before you actually start writing your arguments in defense of the proposition or against the proposition that you're making, depending on negative or positive proposition that you have decided to write your paper upon. So now we'll move to the next step. The next step is very important. This is a very simple point that you have to keep your arguments as simple as possible. Why? Because if you tend to complicate your arguments will likely be complex, and complex arguments are tough to drive to a conclusion. Complex arguments make it difficult for you to hover around your central proposition because you might complicate yourself and your readers as well. So always try to keep your arguments as simple as possible. Say your thoughts in the simplest way so that the readers can go through your paper seamlessly, conveniently, and comprehensively. Still, you have to be very careful that you don't have to make your paper a kindergarten paper. You have to be serious where you have to be serious, but it doesn't mean that being serious means being complicated, being perplexing, being hyper intellectual. You have to be simple, you have to be serious, and if required, you can also be complicated, because in literature there are instances where we have to be complicated. We have to make our thoughts versatile. So that freedom you have, but don't exercise it irresponsibly. Always try to keep your arguments as simple as possible so that your arguments can convey your thoughts in a clear, in a frank, in a direct way to the readers. And then we move to our third step. The third step is also very important. This tells you that you have to back your arguments with irrefutable evidence. And in literature, when we talk about irrefutable evidence, that is always going to be textual evidence, primary textual or secondary textual. Primary or secondary is something that we all understand. So, you have to base your arguments upon hard facts, hard textual evidence. If you are talking about Shakespeare's writing skills, you have to give your proofs from Shakespeare's text. You can cite his drama, you can cite his sonnets, you can cite other forms of writing if he has done, if you can discover. So, always remember that howsoever tough or howsoever simple your arguments are, your arguments should be backed up by pieces of evidence that are irrefutable, that are undeniable, and also valid and credible. And now we'll move to our fourth step. Fourth step is a little complex because in this step I'm going to tell you that you also have to be the devil's advocate. By this I mean that if you are trying to support a proposition, a central proposition, the central idea that drives your paper with your arguments, you'll also have to present the possible counter arguments to contradict your ideas when it's necessary. Some of your readers, or most of your readers in fact in literature, most of your readers are going to be contradictory, are going to be reading your paper with a negative mindset that I have to prove this guy wrong. I have to prove this guy's propositions wrong. So you don't have to give them that rope. You actually have to make their task simple. By doing this, you will be making it convenient for them to know what might be the possible counter arguments, and then with forceful arguments, forceful, stronger than that of your oppositions, than that of the arguments you are trying to make against your proposition. So the arguments that you make against your proposition and the arguments that you make in support of your proposition, that is actual driving force of your paper, those arguments that you make for yourself should be stronger than those arguments you make for those readers who are going to be reading your paper with a negative mindset. So when it's necessary, you have to counter your arguments by yourself, and it will actually make your task easy to make your readers understand what you're trying to prove, because they will have both the opportunities to see your arguments and also to see and read the possible opponent's arguments. So step 4 tells you that you have to be the devil's advocate at times. And now we move to our final step. And final step is very simple. You have been keeping it simple all along, and then in your conclusion you have to offer the strongest arguments in favor of your central proposition. Suppose my title is Shakespeare and the pinnacle of dramatic art in Elizabethan age. Now, in my conclusion, I have to give the possible arguments which will not be denied by any possible opponent, by any possible counter arguments, or it will always have its head high if compared to other arguments proposed by your opponents or proposed by yourself. In short, in conclusion, you have to save your arguments that are the strongest. In simple words, save the best for the last. And now I'll just conclude this and I will recap it for those who have skipped my video and reached to the conclusion. So there are 5 essential steps to make your arguments stronger. The first step is always think of counter arguments before you are going to write your arguments on your paper. Then second step is you have to keep your arguments simple. And third step is that you have to give irrefutable textual evidences in primary and secondary sources to substantiate, to validate, to support your arguments. In the fourth step, you are going to play devil's advocate at times. That means you have to also offer counter arguments when necessary. And fifth step is always save the best and the strongest arguments for the conclusion part, because this is going to be the most impactful part of your paper. This was our video for today. In today's video, we discussed how to make your arguments stronger, how to make your arguments persuasive and also decisive. So, this was the third video in our series in which we discussed writing a perfect research paper. So, I'll see what more I can do in this series, or I'll move to our literary discourse that will be featuring literary theories, critical analysis, and also how to be an expert in English literature criticism, English literary theory. So these videos will come eventually with time. For now, thank you and all the best.